Welcome to Popcorn Unscripted, the podcast where we dive into movies and TV shows with no scripts, no filters, just real talk and plenty of popcorn. From timeless classics to the newest releases, it's all about real opinions and unfiltered conversation. I'm your host, Bailey, and let's grab some popcorn, sit back, and let the show begin. Welcome to Frightcorn Fest. It is officially Spooky-tober season. It is October. It's Halloween. It is here. I myself am not very much of a Halloween person, although I do like candy, so that's a plus, I guess. But I will say this movie, on the other hand, is going to be an interesting talk because there's so many different timelines with this movie. Of course, we are talking about the one movie that literally labeled the slasher genre. Today we are talking about Halloween 1978. Now, it wouldn't be spooky season without a little bit of a trip back to Haddonfield, correct? So, in this episode, we will talk a little bit about Michael, and we will talk about Laurie and the connection that they have, and we will talk about we'll actually talk about like all of the timelines and things as well, because there's a lot to unpack with Halloween, just in general. There's just a lot to unpack with this franchise, and to be fair, this is one of my favorite franchises, aside from Friday the 13th. But yeah, so I'm just gonna say that, like, this movie also, it established the films that we know and love today, such as Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, maybe even Scream. I'm sure Scream is probably in there too. But to me, all four of these movies, like all four of these franchises, are like the slasher genres. Like, these are like the big four for me. Like, because you have Michael Myers, you have Jason Voorhees, you have Freddy Krueger, and then you have Ghostface, which, of course, we'll get into these movies as the month goes on. Because this is spooky season, so all throughout the month of October, we're going to go through a bunch of different horror movies, new and old. Well, I don't know. There's actually a few good horror movies actually coming out this month. At least two coming out this month that I really probably would want to do. More so, I want to look at Good Boy, but I'll get more into that towards the end of the episode. But so, it all started with a mask, a chef's knife, and one quiet October night. Well, technically not quiet, seeing as Judith was getting it on with her boyfriend that night. So essentially the movie starts with, which, yeah, I also had to keep in mind, like, this movie was filmed in 1978. It's not, like, the best camera work, to be precise, but, it's good for the year, I would say. As far as camera work goes. But the movie starts out in Michael's point of view, and it's him as a kid. So we see him walking towards his house. He walks around, doesn't go through the front door. He walks around, and he sees Judith with her boyfriend, and of course he watches them go up the stairs. And so which, of course, there's a bunch of different theories as to why this happened. We don't exactly know if this is supernatural, or if something had happened to Michael, which, of course, in Rob Zombie's interpretation of this character, Michael was, in fact, bullied. He was, in fact, different from other kids. He was definitely weird. He was like the weird kid in those iterations. But in this movie, where there's not exactly a clear motivation as to why, he kills his sister Judith. Um, or at least to me, there's no clear indication as to why. He goes and kills Judith with the chef's knife. But ultimately, he goes in, he grabs the chef's knife. Her boyfriend ends up leaving. So he goes upstairs. He grabs his mask, and he goes in there. His sister, like, almost totally nude, and kills her. Just outright, like, kills her. Just stabs her to death. And then, of course, he just creepily walks out of the house when his parents conveniently get home. And he's just kind of standing there with the knife in his hand, and the dad takes off the mask, and you just see, like, this blank expression on Michael's face. You just see this blank expression. You're not really sure what was going on in his head or what was happening. There is no clear indication as to why this happened in the first place. So, I would say the setup was certainly simple. To me, it wasn't very effective because it's just like you have that question as to why did Michael do this? What led Michael to do this? Like, you don't really understand who he is or what his motivation was to murder his sister. And so it's just an interesting thing. It's just interesting to me because it's like you can't get into Michael's head because you don't know what's going on in his head. And so for the original version of The Shape, he's called many things, Michael Myers, of course that being his human name, but he's also called The Shape, which is interesting thought as well. So in Halloween, Michael Myers is known also as The Shape, as I just said, in the original film's credits, because the name is a symbolic title for an embodiment of pure, undefined evil rather than a specific person. So John Carpenter originally envisioned Michael as a personified force of evil from a traumatic hospital experience, and the title reflects this concept of a soulless, emotionless shell of a humanity. While the name Michael Myers is spoken in dialogue, the title The Shape was given in the credits to emphasize his nature as an unknowable, unexplainable entity, which honestly says a lot about Michael because, he's just this little kid, he's just this little kid, and it is assumed that he was living a normal life up until the point where he kills his sister. But what made him click? What made the switch flip and be like, I'm going to murder my sister? Like, that is the number one question for this franchise, is why did he kill his sister? Now, throughout this continuity, because this timeline goes through, so you have this one, and then you have 2. You skip 3 because, for whatever reason, 3 has nothing to do with Michael Myers whatsoever, so I just kind of disregard that as a Halloween movie, because it has nothing to do with Michael Myers whatsoever. And then you have 4, 5, and 6. Now, I have yet to watch 4, 5, and 6. I believe I have watched 2 at some point. Not sure when or what actually happens in 2. 1 has been the most I've watched, and then of course I remember Rob Zombie's iterations fairly well. I know I've watched H2O before, and then of course I've watched all of the newer ones, which is 2018, Halloween Kills, and Halloween Ends. But we're specifically talking about 1978, so I'm going to do my best to keep it to that. And then, of course, in this movie, you are introduced to a young lady named Laurie Strode. Now, in this first movie, it is not known what she is to Michael. Now, here's the thing, too. is that in this movie, there is no established connection between Michael and Laurie. She was just a random victim chosen by him for his killings. So essentially, he kills all of her friends, and then at the end, he finally comes after her. Which, of course, if you, like, throughout the movie, you see him, like, scouting these three girls. You see him scouting these three girls. And if you really think about it, I don't really understand, but I think he was going after them because of how much they reminded him of his late sister, Judith. Hence why there is a scene in the movie where one of the girls lay on the bed and Judith's gravestone is sitting above her head. So I genuinely think he went after them because of them reminding him of his late sister. But then again, if Michael Myers is supposed to be just a shell of a human, like, how is he supposed to feel? Like, does he feel anything? Like, that's, and which of course is, that's one of the questions that Dr. Loomis, which is his psychiatrist? Is a psychiatrist? But anyway, but Dr. Loomis was actually trying to figure out what was going on inside of Michael's head until he realized, oh, this is just pure evil, and we need to lock him up. That's essentially where Dr. Loomis had went to, and whether that was right or not, I have no idea, because we don't know much about his time in the psychiatric. We don't know much about his time there at all. We don't know anything. We don't know what he looks like underneath the mask. Anything. We don't know. There's a lot of questions that are left unanswered. There are a lot of questions left unanswered, which is why they end up making sequels and different timelines and stuff. Which of course, in this timeline that we're talking about, like the original timeline, which is this one, Halloween 2, 4, 5, and 6, this, in Halloween 2, it is established that Laurie is his, like, adopted sister. Not necessarily blood-related sister, but adopted sister. And if I also remember correctly, she ends up dying in the second one. And then in the later ones, it's her daughter or something he ends up going after. I don't really remember the whole thing, but yeah. And then you have the H2O timeline where I think she ended up being his blood sister, I think. And then you go through, it's H2O and then Resurrection. And then you have the 2018 Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, which pretty much eradicates, they're not even related in that continuity. Which, of course, that continuity happens 40 years later, whereas H2O is 20 years later. And then I think in the original, after Halloween 2, I don't know how many years had passed since then, but we'll get into it, I'm sure. I promise, we'll get into it, but one thing I want to focus about is Michael Myers in general. I want to look at him specifically. So, he isn't just a slasher villain. He's the idea of evil that won't stop coming. He is terrifying in more ways than one, in the way he's just super quiet, in the way he just walks, and then, of course, the mask being the most iconic thing about Michael Myers is the mask. And also the fact that you don't even know what he looks like underneath said mask as well, I think is also an interesting mystery, is that you don't know. You just don't know. And it's just incredible. And of course, through these sequels, you have pure evil versus his tragic backstory. Now, here's another thing too, is that in this first movie, we don't know much about Michael Myers' background, as I have stated previously. we don't know much about his background and where he's coming from and what's happened with him and why he kills his sister Judith. We have no idea. And that's one thing about this movie that I guess I don't like, is because you have so many unanswered questions. So he escapes from the psych ward and then he goes back home and just goes on a killing spree. Um I I just find that weird. Like, why would he do that? Which of course, I wasn't paying that much attention because I've watched this movie several times, and it's like I just still don't really I don't ever get a full understanding of why does he kill his sister, which of course this this timeline that I am speaking of, coming from this one, which is 2, 4, 5, and 6, is called the Thorn timeline. Now, here's the thing about the Thorn timeline, is that it's a bunch of, like, hoopla, I guess, is what you could call it. It's a bunch of hoopla. And so, essentially, these druids that lived in Haddonfield cursed Michael, apparently. Allegedly. They cursed him, and he became a child, which is why he has to do a bunch of killings, but he also rests in between all of his killings. And it's just an interesting characterization, and I just don't know how I feel about this timeline. The Thorn timeline is just so interesting. And also, I think I know Paul Rudd is in one of these movies. I don't remember which one exactly, but he is in one of these Halloween movies. I just don't remember which one exactly. And so, I just think that's kind of funny, but I digress. But Carpenter's original his original vision for this character, I'm not entirely sure what his vision was for this character, but it's to be fair, I'm having a hard time trying to even think or trying to explain, because this time, like, there's so many timelines, there's just so much to Michael Myers that you don't even know. And then I don't even know if you want to include Rob Zombie's continuity as well, because that's just a whole entire reboot. And I will say it's a very badass reboot. It's a very brutal reboot. His version of Michael Myers is very, very brutal. I would say his Michael Myers borderlines Jason, in my opinion, because I think Jason is more brutal out of the four, even though you do have Freddy Krueger as the Dream Demon. But I consider, like, for Freddy Krueger in the dream state, he can be brutal. But in real life, with his claw hand, or whatever you want to call that, I don't think he's that brutal. But he is pretty brutal in his dream world. But as we see in Freddy vs. Jason, yeah, Freddy Krueger's not that brutal in person. He's really not. He tries to be, but he's not. But I'm getting off topic a little bit. But Michael Myers is just one of those, like, kind of like specialty, like. And this is also getting off topic again. I want to see him and Jason go at it. I want to see what they would do against each other. Like, because Jason is motivated by his mother, his late mother. And then Michael Myers is. Which is hence why he's called the Shape. He just is. And it's just. We like, Michael Myers can either be possessed, or he's just a shell of a human that's being controlled by something. We don't entirely know. Is he human? Is he supernatural? The fact that we still don't know, really, we just don't really know, is part of what makes him last. It's just such an interesting thing about Michael Myers, is that it's just, oh my gosh. I adore this character a lot. I do. I really do. I love this story. But I'm gonna move on, and we're gonna talk about Laurie Strode for a second. Now, of course, we talked about the different continuities, but Laurie isn't just a final girl, she is the blueprint for the entire franchise. Laurie Strode is the heart of this franchise, as well as Michael Myers, but Laurie Strode, it's always focused around her and her family. Uh, so, in this original arc of this movie, she is like on survival instincts at the start. And then once she starts finding her friends all dead, she's then put into a trauma. And then she has to try to survive the night of Michael Myers. She's having to survive. Survive. And then you have her return in H2O. She's a hardened survivor. She's now a mother. And not only that, but she also has to be a fighter once again and fight for her life. And then she returns once again in the 2018 reboot trilogy. She's more prepared. She has PTSD. She has generational trauma. Laurie has been through it, man. Like, she's been through it. Now, we of course, there's one thing that we also don't know about Laurie is the impact that Michael has on her after these events. Like, what happens to her after these events? Like, does she get to a nut house? I'm assuming she would have to go to some sort of psychiatrist or some sort of therapist after that, because she literally saw all of her friends be murdered. Well, not really, but she saw how they were murdered. All of her friends were murdered that night, and she had to escape death. Like, she really had to talk to somebody. Like, for real. Like, she had to have talked to somebody. And Jamie Lee Curtis's performance in this movie is absolutely amazing, which, of course, I believe this character is her baby. This character is Jamie Lee Curtis's baby, and I could be totally wrong, but I think this movie was Jamie Lee Curtis's breakout role as well. And this is what made her one of the greatest horror icons of all time. For sure, is this movie. And she does an absolutely amazing job as Laurie Strode. She always has, and always will. And I was actually sad to see it end, though. I was sad to watch Halloween Ends because I didn't want it to end. Michael Myers is just such an interesting character. Like, why would you want to get rid of that? You know? But I digress. And you also see Laurie evolve throughout this movie too. You see she's very what's the word? She's very observant of her surroundings, which is good for her because I believe that's one of the things that ends up saving her is that she's very observant and she can get around it, but her friends on the other hand is not. And she push goes to shove, she was certainly the smartest one out of the group of friends that she's got, to be fair. But she wasn't pressured to do anything. Laurie ended up doing the thing that she's meant to do, which was babysit the kids. She didn't fall into you could see that she would fall under peer pressure, but by the end of Halloween night, she definitely didn't fall under that peer pressure, and I think that's another thing that saved her too. Is that she didn't fall under that peer pressure. She wasn't under any influence or anything. She just found the bodies, and then Michael said, "Hello, I'm going to kill you now," and tries to kill her, and she evades him. And yeah, the I will say the real magic of Laurie Strode is how real she feels. We've seen her scared, strong, broken, and rebuilt. Like, this woman is like the strongest woman I have ever seen in my life, aside from my mother. But that's besides the point. So, I also want to talk about now the uh Laurie Michael dynamic. It isn't necessarily a rivalry as much as it is a collision of fate. Like like I said previously, Laurie is a completely random victim. Like, in this first movie, we did not know that there was any connection between him and her at all. But it is kind of implied with how much he follows them around that there should be some sort of connection between him and her. But I don't like the idea of them being like, I do, but I don't. But I guess it kind of depends on how you play out the story. I guess it is, in a way. It just kind of depends on how you want to play out the story. Um, because their relationship changes throughout each timeline. Now, you have the Thorn timeline, and then you have the H2O timeline, which is 20 years later, and then you have the H40 timeline, which is 40 years later, which is the 2018 Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends. And so with having these three different timelines, two of them of which say that they are brother and sister. One says that Laurie was adopted, and the other says that they are blood related. If I'm remembering this right, if I'm for sure remembering this right, because the first timeline is the Thorn timeline, which is the original sequel, which the original sequel revealed Laurie was Michael's adopted sister, and this story continued through the next films, eventually involving Laurie's daughter, Jamie Lloyd. And then you have the Halloween H2O timeline, and in that timeline, Laurie faked her own death and changed her name to escape Michael, and she continued to be connected to him as his sister, as like in blood related. So, and it's funny because it's the original Halloween that this film does not establish any familial relationship between Michael and Laurie. He just simply targets her. And then, of course, you have 2018 Halloween Kills and Halloween Ends, and in this continuity, it acts as a direct sequel from the 1978 film, but it's just 40 years later. It ignores all the sequels that came before it, therefore, it's a revelation in Halloween. It's a revelation in Halloween 2 that Halloween 2 never happened, and Laurie and Michael are not siblings. So this is just, he's just been in that psych ward for 40 years instead of being in there for 20. Now, keep in mind, this movie happens 15 years after he kills his sister Judith as well. So there is also, there's that as well. I would say that Laurie is certainly not special to Michael. Specifically in this movie, definitely not. Although I do think he could have had an attraction to her, but I think that would be pushing it. But I'm just getting that because he followed them so much. But then again, we don't even know why he's specifically targeting them. To be fair, we don't know what his motives are. We don't know why he's targeting these people specifically. We don't know his motives. That's the thing, is that we don't know Michael's motives in this first film. We don't know why he's doing this. We don't know why he's targeting these young women. We don't know. We just don't know. We don't know. There's, like I said before, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and that's one thing I don't like about it, is because there's so many unanswered questions, there's so many loose ends that never really get tied up. Which, of course, I think the new trilogy from 2018 to Halloween Ends, I generally think it ties it up fairly nicely. Um, but again, I still don't understand what his motives are. I don't understand why he chooses the people he chooses. Like what like I don't know. Whether he targets women that look or remind him of Judith, I don't personally know. I don't know. Um but the trauma that Laurie goes through bonds them for that time. It bonds them together. That trauma bonds them both together. And of course, with Laurie, if you watch the Blumhouse trilogy, because Blumhouse did make this new trilogy, if you watched that, there's also an obsession there. It's because it's like he haunts her dreams after that day. He haunts her after that day, and it's almost like a fight or flight survival sort of thing, and it's yeah. Um, and of course, the two of them had so many face-offs, and of course, Laurie always comes out on top and ends up in Michael retreating and trying to regroup, and that's just how it's always been. But I will say, this franchise is utter chaos, but in the best way possible. Like, there's just so much, like I said before, there's just so much to unpack in this franchise that it's just like, wow. I don't I there's so many different ways you can go, and of course the Rob Zombie films as well is another way, but of course that's a reboot, and not a remake, but a new continuity, um and things of that nature. Um, so I'm gonna kind of skip this part because I've already talked about the timelines and everything so much in this episode already. But you could pick three random Halloween movies and get three different backstories, and I will say that's pretty fun and pretty incredible that you can do that. You can watch whatever movies you want. You could get an entirely different story. No matter how much you watch, you know. So it's crazy because there'd be no Scream, there would be no Jason, no Final Destination without Halloween. There wouldn't be any of that without Halloween. And this was the movie that started the slasher genre, obviously. This style was very minimalistic, of course, especially with the way the shots are. And don't get me wrong, I kind of nodded to the camera work a little bit, but I have looked at some of the behind the scenes of how this movie was made, and it's certainly interesting to watch the behind the scenes of how these older movies were made, and it is very, very interesting, to say the least. Um, and this movie certainly had a very big influence on how slasher movies are even made today. If you were to look at, because Scream movies are still being made, you know, and of course Halloween Ends came out. Oh, what year was that? Was that 21 when that movie came out? Was that 21, 22? I think is when Halloween Ends came out. Came out at some point. I don't know. But it's it's just I don't even know what else to say anymore. Like, to be fair, I am pretty tired if you can't hear it already, but I'm telling you, this franchise is incredible, to say the least. But To me, Halloween isn't just a horror movie, it's a mythology. And it all comes down to two people, one who wants to kill and one who refuses to die. So, here are some questions I'm going to ask you. What's your favorite Halloween timeline or specific movie? Do you prefer Michael as human or supernatural evil? And where does Laurie rank in your list of horror heroines? Let me know down below. And, yeah. Welcome to Frightcorn Fest. That's a wrap on today's episode of Popcorn Unscripted. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. New episodes drop every Monday and Friday, so be sure to tune in. Until next time, keep your popcorn close and your movie critiques closer. Thanks for listening to Popcorn Unscripted.